Welcome back to Uncharted Waters with Admiral Waters. I'm your co-host, Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Bradley. Lock in with us as we have a conversation about mission and mindset pertaining to all things Navy recruiting. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and share it with everyone. Send it to your mom, send it to your dad, send it to yourself, and watch it 50 billion times. All right, let's get into the conversation. And today we're going to talk about homeschool. Join us with our special guest, Mr. Dennis Zmija, Education Services Specialist.
Yes, sir.
I had to make sure I slowed down with that. So, close to alliteration, didn't want to mess that one up. Sir, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
So prior Navy, I did 22 and a half years. So I've been talking about the Navy for decades, with the kids and things like that, bring their friends over. So I've been here almost 2 years and just absolutely love it. The mission is just, it just fits.
Yeah. What'd you do for the Navy?
So I started as a boiler technician back in the day.
Nice.
And then that went away. So I went from a BT2 to an MM2 to an MA2 all in 1 week.
Oh.
So that's when the conversion happened.
Okay. Really good.
Yep. And so, and then finished off with being a master at arms. So.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you start by giving us a quick overview of your role and how you support recruiting efforts of homeschooled students?
So it started a couple of years ago. When I first got here, I found out that, recruiters can get into schools and talk about ROTC scholarships and all of that. I was like, wow, that's really cool. How does the homeschool community, how do we tell them? And everybody just kind of looked at me like, yeah.
What are you talking about?
No. I was like, well, these great opportunities. I mean, how? And so I set off to level the playing field, because it might not be for everyone, but for those that it is, it's a fantastic opportunity. And so we reached out so everything you read, like the Recruit Man and everything like that, it's all HSLDA. And so my wife and I, we homeschooled our kids when we were stationed in Iceland. And so I knew, and that's kind of how I set the stage. And so we reached out to HSLDA and the Admiral appeared and had a speech in front of everyone. And as soon as he mentioned, we homeschooled our kids, and it changed the entire atmosphere. It went from, ooh, what's this going to be about, to he's one of us.
Right.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
And so, it was great.
So HSLDA is Homeschool Legal Defense Association. It's sort of the, if there is an organization to homeschool, which is really very diverse,
Yes, sir.
HSLDA is kind of that central point. So they run a leadership conference once a year, typically in September. So this past September, I had the opportunity to address them. We sponsored part of their conference, and it gave me the platform to have the conversation. And because they had representatives from every state,
Yes, sir.
that sort of opened the door there. And as you say, my wife and I homeschooled our kids. They're adults now and have transitioned to, careers and families and all those kinds of things. So I think that resonated with those families, many of whom are still in the homeschool,
Yes, sir.
teaching their kids. And so seeing somebody that has completed the run,
Yes, sir.
4 kids all graduating from homeschool and off and running, I think that was a good connection.
Yes,
And this really is about how do we talk to recruiters? How do recruiters engage with the homeschool community, right?
Yes, sir.
I think your role in sort of helping to organize national efforts to be at homeschool conferences and things like that is a critical part of it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And why is the homeschool community an important audience for Navy recruiting, and what makes them unique?
Oh, so there's a lot of different reasons. They're driven. Well, one, they score super high
Mm-hmm.
on the SVAB. There's really no drug issues, no criminal issues, and they follow direction, and they're locked on. They know, they're focused.
Yeah, and I think it's important for recruiters to understand that, a recent study, Johns Hopkins, talked about the fact that it's about 6% of American kids are homeschooled, right? That may sound like a small number, but 6% of a very large number is a pretty good size market. And they operate typically in community. So it's like a school, but once you're in, you're connected to this very large network of people that, as you say, Dennis, typically have, a joy in learning, unafraid to do well on tests. And because, they've grown up in that family environment, there's less of the, waverable things. The other thing that I would communicate to recruiters is that typically, right, that you can't point it, they're all the same, but typically there's a certain level of maturity in that young person. One of the reasons we chose to homeschool, one, knowing we were going to move a lot, that was helpful. But when we met friends of ours that were homeschooling, there were a couple of characteristics of their kids that we really admired. One was there wasn't age segregation. Like the big kids and the little kids all worked and played together. And then the kids, when they were talking to us, could engage in a eye-to-eye contact conversation with an adult, which is, kind of like, ooh, you notice that when an 8-year-old can have that conversation, and then that just develops more over time. That's not to say there aren't problems in homeschooling or that there aren't kids that aren't going to be a right fit for the Navy,
Sure.
But it's a pretty good market. And because they tend to operate in community,
Yes, sir.
once you're sort of in that world, you've earned their trust, you have opportunities.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Absolutely.
And what are some of the biggest misconceptions recruiters might have about homeschool students and their qualifications?
I think that their transcripts won't work, or there's going to be some type of issue like that, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, we've leveled the playing field in the rules. And in fact, recruiters certainly open to feedback. If there's somewhere where you know that there's not a level playing field, let me know, because I'm looking to ensure that it is as level as possible, where a graduate from homeschool is treated the same as a graduate from public or private school.
Yes, sir.
That is awesome. So how do homeschoolers typically view military service, and what draws them to the Navy particularly?
Well, the service and devotion to duty, it's pretty much instilled in them as they're growing up. As far as the Navy in particular, I think it's our technical expertise. That's kind of how it's easier to explain to like a mom. Well, tell me the difference about the, what makes you different from the Army or something like that. And it's, well, our technical expertise puts us over here. If the fight is here, unless you want to be in that fight over here, you're way over here because of our technology.
Okay.
And so I think that helps a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would say that's really important is, as I mentioned, in the homeschool community, there's this sort of freedom to learn without, sort of peer driven ridicule or concern, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that like every homeschool kid is striving to get to Harvard. Right. Because there's that freedom to learn kind of what you are, and what you want to learn and what you're particularly good at. There's also a strain in homeschooling of moving toward the right job or right career that isn't necessarily college bound, right? Like a trade,
Yes.
right? And so that ability to jump into a trade and with no experience, there's no apprenticeship. You get hired to be an electrician or equipment operator, an IT, and we give you the training. That there is that sense that you're not necessarily overcoming the typical public schools or private schools bias toward all of our kids go to college or they've failed.
Right.
Good point.
Right. In the homeschool world, there is still that sense that, of achieving excellence means you got to go to college, but there is also an openness to excellence looks like a lot of different things.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
Very good point.
I think that's another opportunity that recruiters can leverage.
Yes, sir.
I didn't even expect to sit here and get motivated about homeschool, as I have another son getting ready up there. And just to speak to those pressures, sir, I remember my son, who's now going to be a college sophomore, the pressures of his peers having made the decision of what college. Mm-hmm. He's still trying to figure himself out, and then it provided a level of anxiety to him. And I see my next son coming up, he's a rising junior, having those same kind of pressures, like, what am I going to do? And so I can see how homeschool will lift that pressure for them to simply become,
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
What are some best practices for initiating contact with homeschool families or co-op groups?
Be genuine. It's at that, if you get the opportunity, it's not about the number. It's about being honest and genuine. Because once that happens, you're set with that family and all of their friends.
You have to also keep in mind that in the homeschool community, that there's this dichotomy that's going on. There's a love of service, as you mentioned, a respect for the military, right? A recognition. I mean, when I speak to homeschool groups, they're very glad that I'm there. They're very supportive. But you also have to remember those same people have decided not to put their kids in government schools, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a little bit of a sense of like, okay, right? And so you're dealing with a little bit of that balance. That's why transparency and authenticity, right? So they can see the person that's wearing the uniform is a normal human that has, benefited from their time in the Navy and gained skills and gained opportunity and really helping them to see, like, that feeling when you see a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, where you want to say, thank you for your service. Mm-hmm. That person has earned that by joining that service, right?
Yes, sir.
And we want that for our kids. And I think it's also important for homeschool families to recognize and have that communication with a recruiter about, hey, you're raising kids that you believe are the very best. Your nation will benefit from their life and service to their country, right? Sure. And so that part of the discussion, I think, is important.
Yes.
But the authenticity of the recruiter is super important to overcome this sense of, like, we're the government and we're here to help, which is not a good way to approach the homeschool community, right? And then I'll just go on just a little bit here, that the work that you've done to help us get into HSLDA and then on to the homeschool conventions, that each state typically has an annual homeschool convention.
Yes.
For the recruiters out there, if you get a chance to participate in one of those, that's a great opening to communicate with homeschool families. Connect with recruiters in your NTAG that have participated, because we're in most of the states this year in their communities or in their conventions.
That's awesome.
60.
Yeah, I was just in Virginia. 10,000 people were coming through that convention over the course of 2.5 days. And in Orlando in Florida, they had 18,000, right? Florida's showing off.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was ginormous.
Yes.
Large population of potential Navy sailors. And what kind of questions should recruiters be prepared to answer when talking to homeschool families?
So one of these is this, like, what's it like from a faith perspective, right? Am I going to,
Yes, sir. Yes,
be
sir.
challenged there?
Yep. And then the normal questions, are we going to go to war? What happens? That's probably it's the same with many other, potential sailors. It's pretty much the same questions, except that is my beliefs going to be challenged? How I grew up, is that,
Yeah. I think that's a great point. One of the things that I would encourage recruiters to think about is when you're answering a question like you pose, right? Are my beliefs going to be challenged? Or I think it's okay to say, yeah, in the world, there will be debate and discussion, but your kids are well prepared for that, right? But the way that I talk about it, what better place for a young person to transition from schooling within the family to the wider world than within the discipline and structure of the military, right? To help guide and shape that as they transition from teenage years and young adult into mature adult. That structure provides guidelines, guardrails to that growth. But ultimately, we as homeschool parents, I count myself, can have confidence that what we poured into those kids
That's right.
is ready for that kind of interaction and challenge. They're going to be challenged wherever they go.
Yes.
Right? What better place than within the structure and discipline of the military? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like leaving one community and structure to a larger scale community and structure. And we have core values. We have ethos.
That's right.
So it's definitely a good opportunity to transition to something like that and be a good fit. What are the current enlistment criteria for homeschool graduates, and how does it differ from traditional high school grads? And so I know you spoke on it should be the same level playing field, but are there any identifying points that are different?
The only difference that I'm aware of is the transcript has to be notarized. And then the last step in the recruit manual, the parent has to explain the homeschool. How did you homeschool? Other than that, everything's the same.
Okay. And how can recruiters access additional resources to support their homeschool recruiting efforts?
Surprisingly, it's kind of hard to find it online because a lot of them use actually Facebook pages, but their education services specialists, Homeschool Mom, she actually breaks down every state, every co-op, well, for the most part, because there's quite a few. Those would probably be the best ones. And then the state ones are recognized pretty well. Yeah.
And the other thing I would tell recruiters is, again, HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, has a website and contacts, but they have a military liaison. Okay. And that military liaison can point you at if you can't find the homeschool organization in your area, can point a recruiter at that organization so they have a point of contact, can reach out. There, just like we do presentations in school, there are homeschool co-ops. So people do homeschooling in a lot of different ways. One of the ways is that folks get together and this mom or dad teaches science and this mom or dad teaches English. So those same opportunities for presenting, for the new coordinator to come in and do a presentation on physics or some science related to nuclear power, or any recruiter to contribute in that. There are opportunities there.
Yes.
No promises from me that like everyone's going to be like, absolutely come in.
Right.
But those same things that we do in public school, apply in that co-op forum.
Good point. Good point. Sir, do you have any closing remarks for?
The homeschooling community, like the Admiral said, 3.2 million are being homeschooled as of 2024, according to the research. And then I was just in Texas. The president said they have between 500,000 and 600,000 just in Texas. So there's a huge market. I mean, are all of them in our target market? No, but there's a bunch that are. And just when you go, please be genuine. Don't try to, just slip. Yeah, they'll catch you.
Yeah, because you just got to remember, while they are patriotic, they chose not to put their kids in government school. So
That's
there's
right.
going to be that level of, like, if you look like a
Cheesy car salesman.
cheesy car salesman, they're going to recognize that.
Yeah.
But they are going to respect you for what you've chosen to do. And so that opens the door to a conversation. Then the rest is up to the recruiter.
Yes, sir.
Right? Yeah. So thanks for taking the time
Thank
to have
you,
the
sir.
conversation today, for leading the charge to, open the door with homeschool families and communities. I think it's going to take us some consistent time
Yes, sir.
to really see the fruit of that in the numbers growing. But the relationship is good. Every time I interact with a homeschool organization, it's a positive interaction. And so I'm encouraged by it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us for today's conversation. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.